Thank you. These are the real leaders. These are the courageous leaders tonight because you're here on a Monday night. So thank you for being here. I do want to go ahead. I think I have on this one that one right there. I want you to look at this. I want y'all to read that to me, okay? Because I'm going to say the first part. A church that changes the world needs what things? Very good. You know the last night I'm going to ask you to do it from memory. So y'all better be studying at home, right? There is homework there involved. So I am looking at Joshua 1, the first 9 verses there, and I've been kind of working on one, then working on 2 or 3 more, and then going back and kind of refining and going back and working on other. And I realized today, I think our last session on Wednesday, I actually started Joshua 1. 10, and this, so we'll do part 1 tonight, and then we'll kind of wrap up on one of those on Wednesday. But we'll come back to that. Joshua this has always been one of my favorite verses. I love all that's going on here in the life of Joshua. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. But I'm going to read this for you. Just read these first 9 verses. And then we'll launch there, and then we're going to do a little something different tonight. Rather than try to do this and then have a break, and then come back and finish, because we all like to eat. I think I figured that out last night. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and do all my session now, and then we'll go eat. We can stay as long as we want to over there. How about that? That work with y'all? So, all right. Joshua 1 says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all of his people, into the land that I'm giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now wouldn't it be great if God said that to us? That's a good word there to say to us. I want to begin by looking at the first point, which I see that here in verse 1 and 2, which basically says that we need to put the past in the past, right? But then we need to move on. In that little section right there, just the verse 1, or actually it's just all in verse 2, where it says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, arise and go. That's a quick turnaround right there. Okay? All right, Moses, who did all this work and got us to this point, is here, but he's dead. So now let's keep going. Let me tell you a story. On February the 23rd, 1945, outside the small town of Los Baños in the Philippines, paratroopers from the U.S. Army 11th Airborne filled the sky as they parachuted on a World War II mission to rescue American and Allied civilian prisoners of war from the Los Baños internment camp. That camp was 31 miles behind enemy lines. Over 2,000 men, women, and children had suffered abuse and starvation at the hands of their Japanese captors for over 3 years. By the time of the rescue, their food rations had been totally cut off. 2 prisoners per day were dying, and a mass grave was being dug just outside the camp. It was obvious to everyone that the Japanese were planning on executing all of the prisoners very soon. So when the paratroopers dropped out of the sky, the recon teams attacked Japanese outposts, and the Amtraks rolled up on the beach. The prisoners were extremely thankful, obviously. They were so thankful that they greeted the soldiers with hugs and began telling them about their 3-year ordeal and thanking the soldiers for saving them. However, unknown to the prisoners, but very much on the minds of the soldiers, there were over 85,000 Japanese soldiers making their way toward them from the south. The soldiers were trying to get the prisoners to quickly move to safety, but the prisoners kept milling about. Some of them went back in their barracks and began packing their meager belongings. Others were so excited about their new freedom that they were celebrating like it was a party. It was very difficult for the soldiers to get the 2,000 plus prisoners to move out of the camp to safety. Finally, in desperation, the soldiers set fire to the barracks. That helped the people to move. They noticed that the people were moving away from the fire, so they kept setting fire to the barracks. Some people boarded the Amtraks for transport, others walked the 2 miles to the beach, those that could. But they were all transported to safety. Not a single life was lost among the soldiers and the prisoners. But a valuable lesson was learned that day, that even in freedom, sometimes it's hard to get people to move on. The children of Israel had done it. They'd arrived. They are now, according to what we just read, they're now on the banks of the Jordan. They have completed this journey, this 40-year journey through the wilderness. They finally made it to the promised land. And I'm sure they're happy and they're excited, but also they're possibly sad because Moses, their leader, was dead. Verse 2 is pretty blunt in say the way it says it. Just Moses, my servant, is dead is basically what it says. Then this idea of now go. You need to move. You need to go on. I think God understands our human tendency not only to honor the past, but sometimes our desire to cling to it. Think about what the past looked like for these Israelites. Those that were not born in the wilderness, well, they were there before at the Jordan River. They had been under 20 years of age because what God had told them, and we'll talk about this, I think we'll talk about it on Wednesday night too, is that God tells them, anybody 20 years of older, you're not going to come see the promised land. So that's when they went back out in the wilderness and started wandering. So it wasn't until all those people had died off that they even came back and they were there ready to enter the promised land. So if you think about it, these kids 19 years and younger were standing there. They're the only ones that had been to there before. And now that means that they had actually kind of experienced the slavery part of things. So they were children of slavery. But they were also spent most of their time, the last 40 years, wandering in the wilderness. Moving into the promised land would be unlike anything they'd ever encountered. They were ready, I guess. God had prepared them through that 40 years, but it was going to be different. Everything was going to be different. The culture was going to be different. And we know that when culture shifts, we can't keep clinging to the past. The mission of God remains the same. That means He wants us to reach this culture with the gospel. We know that. But we tend to long for what we know. And we look back and even what we prefer, but longing for that and desiring those things from the past, that really doesn't help us move forward. Yes, we can honor the past. Matter of fact, if you have your scriptures right there, just turn one page back. Look at the very last section of Deuteronomy there. You'll see the death of Moses, and at the very end, which is verse 10, the words say this, and there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all the servants and to all his land, for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Now, those are good words. They're applauding him. He left a great legacy for his people. Even to this day, he is revered in the Jewish faith. And we know about Moses. We talk about Moses. We know how Moses is so important. And yet, two verses later, he gets the treatment of, okay, Moses is dead, let's move on. They didn't linger on the history of what well, I grew up in the wilderness. I did okay living in the wilderness. Maybe we're supposed to be in the wilderness. There's no question about that. The reason for all that was to enter the promised land. They knew that was their focus. They loved and revered Moses, but it didn't take them long to realize we've got to put the past in the past. Moses was then, Joshua's now. We have to move ahead. They're moving on. I think every church should leave a legacy, not to serve as a museum for the methods of a bygone era, but to serve as a launch pad for future generations. We have to honor our history and who we are. We learn a lot. What is it they say? If you don't know history, you don't study it, you're bound to reproduce it over and over again and repeat the mistakes of that history. So there's an importance, I feel like, here for us to understand, and because I deal a lot with a lot of churches who have great stories of how God's moved in the past. And we honor that and we applaud that, and especially when you start talking about major shifts like, hey, we're going to move our whole church to a different location and we got to sell this building. And I've had ladies in tears say, you don't understand. I was a little girl at this church. I was saved at this church. I can go to the spot where I knelt and prayed right here. And I was baptized right there. And all my children were saved here and baptized there. All my kids were married here. And there's a lot of history that goes along with that. And I'm having to talk to pastors, these leaders, and be courageous leaders to put their arm around those folks and say, we understand that. That's a legitimate, painful thing. But the building is just the building. Think of the future generations and all the future people that we're going to be able to reach if we make this shift. Now, not every church has to make a shift and sell the building and do all those kind of things. But it's happening more and more and more. Especially when you're in hundreds at least a 100-year-old building that's requiring, I know one church right now, it requires right now, if they had the money, it'd be $250,000 that they needed to have right now just to repair what's needed to be repaired. That's $250,000 they need right now. They don't have that. And so, and then they're thinking, well, even if we have that and we get all that repaired, then we're in debt for $250,000, but we're still using the building and it's still deteriorating. It's a 100-year-old building and it comes with all the problems of that. And so it's having that big discussion, and right now that church that's happening right now. But that's not the only thing. There are tons of other issues that they face of getting down. I talk about Woodlawn Baptist Church had to do this in Jacksonville. You may know of it. It's a small. It was actually a very large church at one point. But the neighborhood changed and everything shifted, and the interstate was built basically right over the top of Woodlawn Baptist Church. And so I tell people, if you've ever been to Jacksonville in a few years, you probably passed right over it and you didn't even realize it was there. And so what happened was they got down to 12 people. And the pastor that was there, lovingly, he was doing a great job, but he basically said, look, folks, we need to leave a legacy. Yes, we have this building here. Yes, it's important, but we can't pay for it. What do we have to do? And so they sold the building. They actually folded into another church, but they took the money from that sale of that building, which was about $300,000, and they gave that to the Jacksonville Baptist Association. And I was there when they took that money, they invested it, so half that money was drawing more money, and half that money was being used. And so every year they'd take a draw out of the half that that was in the investments. And at the last count I had, there were 53 churches that had been started because of that money. So what that did was a church, again, that could seem like a failure, but again, it wasn't their fault. It was everything had shifted around them. The culture shifts. You have to make a decision. They made the decision to invest that legacy and serve as a launch pad for other churches. And like I said, 53 churches that I know of. I've been gone a little while, so it could be even more than that now. That money has funded to be able to launch those churches. And think of the kingdom impact that church has made just by choosing. Not just, we don't call it dying because they didn't die as a church. They are still the church. They're just meeting with another group now as well. The church universal has continued on and even advanced because of the decisions they made. So that's part of what it means to be a courageous leader, making those kinds of decisions, leaving a legacy. But part of what it also means, and it's not really in this passage, but it is, and that is Moses is dead, now we have Joshua. Right? Part of being a courageous leader is having this idea and this focus of replicating yourself, which is exactly what Moses did. Matter of fact, in Exodus 33:11, I'm not going to turn there and read it, but it's this wonderful little, actually, I think most of that little section there in Exodus 33, it talks about how the tent of the meeting was set up outside the camp. And so that's where Moses would go. And it even says, as Moses would get up and he would go to the tent of the meeting, that the people would come and they'd stand in front of of their tents as they watched Moses walk to the camp. And it even says they worshiped at their door because they knew that their leader was meeting with God. And when you get down to verse 11, it says this interesting thing, that Moses would come back, but it says Joshua stayed in the tent. You see, while Moses was actually leading and doing all these things, he was pouring into the life of Joshua. So Joshua, even as a young boy, is seeing exactly what Moses is doing. And that desire to meet with God is actually, we see in the heart of Joshua. And so as this is taking place, and as this 40 years rolls by, and we know what happened with Moses, and he, is not allowed to go into the promised land, but he's there, and he can see over into the promised land, but it's Joshua that takes the reins. So that almost sounds frustrating, wouldn't it? You see, Moses was leading, but the trouble was here he didn't get to fulfill that. And we'll talk about that in a few seconds. But that's the idea. That's really what discipleship is that Moses is pouring everything he knows into the heart and the mind of Joshua, the next leader. We should all be doing that. I hesitated to even call this courageous leaders because a lot of people won't come because, well, they're not talking to me. I'm not a leader. Trust me, you're a leader. If you're leading someone, I'll say, there's somebody watching you, just like there were people standing at the tent door watching Moses. There's somebody watching you. So what is it you're doing in intentionally pouring? You're a teacher, and do you have somebody that you're pouring into to teach? Is somebody else being trained to run the board up there so that they know how to do it? Is somebody else learning from you and the things maybe that you volunteer to do? You should have somebody with you. We did that at Schindler when I was there, and it was basically you need to have somebody with you. We don't want anybody doing a job by themselves. Everybody should be pouring into somebody else. And it was uncanny because our band really did that. We had a band performed on Sunday morning, and so what they ended up doing was the kids and the youth, and even the youth, they had a semi-youth band. But those kids would actually work alongside and be involved in what they were doing on Sunday morning at the level that they could do it. One of the girls, one of my favorite, I've known her since she was tiny, watched her grow up, but she wanted to play the bass. So one of the guys who'd been playing the bass in the band would be there on a Wednesday night, and so after the youth stuff, you'd see them. The mom would be there. They all kind of wait around, but he'd take about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and teach her to play the bass. Sometimes I get the opportunity to look at the service at Schindler now, and I can see Caroline back there playing the bass, singing those songs, worshiping God. And I'm thinking, that's what it's all about. Being able to pour into the next person, the next generation. And it makes it easier because when things happen and you can't be there, somebody has to sit out, you have somebody who can come in and it gets done. So that's part of it. Courageous leaders have to put the past in the past, and they need to move forward. The second point there is the trust in the promises of God. We see this in verses 3 through 6. It says, every place that the sole of your foot will tread, I will give to you as I promised to Moses. Skipping down, number 5, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. You see, the promises that God gave, and again, he gave them to Moses. He's given them, he's been with them this entire time. But they were, if you look at the first verses there, verse 3, it is the fulfillment of their promise, of God's promise, is about their obedience. It's about them walking. He says every step that you take, every time you take a step into that promised land, that's your land. So if you stop and don't move, guess what? That's it. You got your land. That's your land right there. So the obedience of moving forward and going to where God is calling them to be, every time they moved, they were expanding their kingdom. the land. So the promises were coming true, but it was up to them to move. Does that make sense? We got to have courage in this case to trust God just as he's worked in the past. That's part of what I said, even when we talked about it on Sunday, that my original thought when I was kind of putting all this together was I thought that the process of the wilderness was actually training the people to think differently. They were going to moving from a slave to an army. That was really what was my thought. They're moving from slave mentality to army mentality. And I guess some of that's true, but the truth is that forced obedience, I talked about that yesterday morning, to a willing obedience, to be able to say, okay, God, I'm going to do whatever you want to do. Because if you look further, and we'll be looking at that again, I think that's Wednesday night, that if he's going to be an army, then why did he take the promised land with a trumpet and a lantern and a clay pot? That's not very good army stuff. What they needed was to be willing and obedient to follow God in whatever he told them to do, because he was the one giving them the land. It wasn't about their strength to do it. And I think about that as I'm talking to pastors who are in churches that are struggling and declining, and it's like it's not most pastors can't do that. They can't stop that. They can't change the culture. They can't shift what they're supposed to be doing. But we can do what we talked about before, have our people fall more in love with Jesus. And as we fall more in love with Jesus, we understand our purpose and our mission in life. And as we do that, then the forms and the things, the changes we need to make in the church come naturally for us, because that's why we're changing them. And it's ones we do together. And that's why you can put your arm around somebody who really is going through a pain because of this change that's going on. These pews, my parents helped pay for these pews. I got a plaque on the pew that has my name on it, but we're going to go to chairs. Well, in the great scheme of life, 100 years from now, is it going to matter whether we met in chairs or pews? No. We know that. But it's still painful to make the change. As I've said already, it's not the change that's the problem, it's the transition. We know the change may need to come, but it's me letting go of what I want and desire and expect and saying, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we making this change? And it's always should be about the mission of what God has us on. The other idea here is that promises we're backed up by God's presence, because he says, I'm going to go with you. I'll be with you. Don't worry about what you have to give up, or that you're walking into this new territory because all you've ever seen is slavery and dirt. Now you're in this promised land that's got this wonderful abundance, but you don't know how to handle that. But don't worry about it. I got this. You see, the courage comes when we trust God that he's not going to leave us alone. So no matter what changes and shifts that I'm talking to pastors about and talking to churches about, they're making their plans and strategies and doing those things. They don't have to worry about it because God knows. The more we tie into him and find out what he wants, the easier it is to let go of what we have been holding on to. And the last one is this promise. Again, it says, I've given it to Moses. I gave this promise to Moses. Well, we've already read that. Moses is dead. So what that means is the promise given to Moses never got to experience. Right? So when we are looking ahead and planning ahead, maybe we're planning not for ourselves, but for our future generation. And maybe we have that promise that God's going to be with us and all that, but we're not going to see the fulfillment of that. And honestly, I get that can be painful. Because if I'm going to give up something, man, I need to get a return, right? I want to see this, and that's when the pastors get. They say there's usually a double bump when we go through revitalization. There's a double exodus, I should say, and that is you've got people that don't want to agree, so they're all going to leave. That happens early on, and then things start to get better, but then it takes a little longer than what they planned. And people said, "Now I gave up this, and this," and Pastor, no, we've only got like 4 more families, but you said we'd have more than this. We'd be reaching the community by now. And so you usually have this a second drop in attendance because people get tired of hanging on. And then God usually, and if you can see it as it happens, the drops because of the changes they make, and then things get better. They drop again. They don't drop as far as they were over here, but they drop, and then God starts using them. It's just so consistent every time you see this graph when churches go through revitalization. And so knowing that, we can say, hey, God may not be fulfilling this in your lifetime or for you to be able to see it. But what we're doing matters. If we're following God's promise, we can trust in the promises of God that he's going to fulfill what he's promised. Does that make sense? The third part here is that we need to be careful to follow God's word. Obviously, it says that in verses 7 through 9. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Again, it's Moses. He's pointing back to Moses in the past. But all those laws, those things, it's a foundation that Moses built is what they're building on. Don't turn them from the right hand or the left. Then they talk about the book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night. They're talking about God's law, about his word. And we need to be careful that we abide by those things. We do that. You see, God doesn't send us out on our own and say, figure it out. He's with us, and we've said that. That's part of what we've said. But not only is he with us, he's given us those clear instructions in his word on what kind of people we are to be. All those one another's we see in Scripture. That's what we need to be focused on. Because so many times we focus on those other things, on that ecclesiological box of what it is we're supposed to what we think a church is supposed to look like. And we know it. We know that if you go to a different culture, church may look totally different. That people are gathering on Sunday mornings in Africa under a tree after they walk 5 miles, right? So we know that's a different kind of church, but we know it's the same church. We are part of the church, capital C, and we know that, but we still get in here and we complain that it's too cold, right? Because, well, we're just used to that. But we forget about our brothers and sisters in Africa who've having to give up so much. Some people in Middle East countries that are being threatened, that they're having to meet, but they're having to meet behind closed doors quietly, or else, out of being threatened with death. And yet, we have been so taken care of, and so we're used to these beautiful buildings and air conditioning and all those good things that we get spoiled by that. And so we understand it, but it's just still, when it comes to experiencing it, it's a little different. So when we read here, we realize, okay, maybe, I don't remember church pews ever being mentioned in any part of the Scripture, but maybe those one another's are the part we need to be focusing on. That we're to love one another, we're to minister to one another. All those things that it says about how the church created or treated each other, those are the things that we really need to be putting ourselves to. That goes back to the Christology part and the missiology part. And that makes more sense of how we build a church and what do we do with that church. Courageous leaders will study the word, will understand it, and then they'll live it out. That's really what it's about. But it is so easy, and I understand it. And I've got a story here. I always tell this story for pastors because it gets so tiresome. If you're a deacon, I understand that you hear the chatter from people who aren't quite happy with the way things are going, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And all those, again, I've kind of said, shifting chairs on the Titanic sometimes. And it makes us feel better that we're doing something, but when there's deep change that has to take place, when there's honestly coming before God and saying, God, change my heart, help us to love each other and to love this community and reach them with the gospel, that it changes us. We have to do that. But sometimes it's hard when you keep getting that chatter. So let me tell you this story. I heard it as a true story. I don't think it is, but it might be a preacher story. But the guy told me, he said he experienced this. A man was crossing a river on a ferry. You know how that works. I don't know if you've been on a ferry. You pull your car up. Some let you pull the car on. In this particular ferry, they had a young man who came out. You had to get out of your car. The young man got in the car and he parked it. was a smaller ferry, so they had to really kind of make sure it was parked correctly and in such, you couldn't just let anybody park. So this young guy is parking the cars. And this guy is watching, and he hands his keys over to the young man, and he parks it, and he's very impressed with this young man. He noticed that the young boy, he's 17, 18, he parks the car, he kind of steps out, looks at his, looks around, then he turns back and goes and gets the next car in line. And so the man was just very impressed with the way this young man was doing. So he kind of captivated. He stands on the side of the ferry watching this young boy do this. An older man walks up, with a really nice car, like a Lincoln or whatever. And he gives a little criticism. He's not sure I want to hand this nice car over to this young boy. And so he tells him what he needs to do and be careful and all that kind of stuff. And the guy says, well, I got to do it. So he gets the keys. He parks the car. The older man runs over to him and just says, hey, you're a little too close here. You shouldn't have done that. That was a jackrabbit start. He's complaining. And he said that young man just smiled and nodded, thanked the man. And after it was done, he went on and continued his work. And so after all the cars were on the ferry, it's crossing the water. And the man said he saw the young boy kind of, his work was done until he has to take him off. So he's sitting on the side overlooking the rail there, looking out at the water. And he walks over to him and he says, I just want to say, I'm impressed with you. Did you handled that criticism? I think you didn't talk back when that man talked to you. I noticed that, and I just want to commend you. And how did you keep your cool? And being such a young guy. And the guy said, well, you were watching me, right? He goes, yeah. And he said, then you noticed that when I got out of the car that I kind of stopped and hesitated. And he goes, yeah, I noticed that. What was that about? He said, well, I was looking at the car, but also up on that little ledge up there was the captain, my boss. And so I would look at him and he gives me a nod if I did a good job. So when that man was talking to me and telling me I'd done everything wrong, it didn't matter because I'd already gotten the nod from my captain. And when I share this with pastors, I tell them it's going to be tough. It is hard to have change in a church without it hurting feelings and things going on. And growing a church is always going to be difficult. But if you can look and you can spend some time on your knees and you can get the nod of God, then that makes all the difference in the world. Then you can love those people that are criticizing you, that don't agree with you or whatever. But it's because it's not about that. It's not about, you have to understand everybody's going to address change differently. It is painful. Everybody responds to pain in different ways. And so as we're going through this together, you can love on those folks and do it because the captain's already given the nod, right? He's already told you you're doing a good job. But you have to be close enough. Again, you got to be looking at him. It's not about you and what you're doing. And I tell this to all the leaders, that as you're doing things and you're praying and you're meeting, and I deal with a lot of vision teams that are trying to make some changes and praying through that. And I tell them, don't even talk about changes or the plans and the strategies until you've spent a while praying together and looking to God. Because you have to be so close to God that, again, you're looking at it from his point of view. You're trying to see what he sees. And a courageous leader is going to know that we've got to put the past in the past and move forward. We've got to trust in God's promises. And you've got to be careful to follow his word. Because when you're doing those things, then it's not going to be perfect. There's never a straight line when it comes to growth and revitalization. But there is this sense of we're doing this together. We're family. Families argue sometimes, okay? But we're still family. And I've seen churches that have just done a fantastic job at that. Loving on each other. Pouring the love on more, even as you know, people are not happy. I've sat down with people in their living room because we were making some changes. She didn't like it. And I've sat there and I've approached her and had that conversation. And she wasn't happy with me, but she knew I loved her. And she didn't leave. She was talking about leaving the church. She didn't leave the church. She's there. When I left the church and to come here, she was one of the ones hugging my neck and crying and saying she's going to miss me. Because we were able to do that, to maintain the relationship, to be able to focus where we need to focus, even during times of transition. So that's part of what I wanted to share with you. That's the biblical part of what I wanted to share. But I also have, again, I've kind of promised to give you a sense of what this looks like, okay? And to be a courageous leader. And this is an illustration I use a lot. Yes, this is a brick, and this is a rubber band. And what we talk about is sometimes, especially in churches in revitalization, they've just been set in their ways so long, and they haven't been moving. We've been talking about, you're going to hear a lot about moving and all that. I'm going to keep talking about that. Because as we're thinking about moving, bricks don't move, okay? And it's hard to get them to move, right? But what I tell them, especially as leaders, is you're the one. You're the one moving. So you're leading that process. Now, I'm aware that we are Baptist, okay? What I say is we are biblically focused. It's the Bible that gives us, we want Christ to speak to us. We're going to be grounded in that. But we're going to be staff-led, but we're going to be congregationally governed. Okay, and there's a difference there. So some people, and I know them, who have said, well, we just hired this guy to come and preach on Sunday. We'll take care of running the church, right? Well, to me, that's not what you see in Scripture. All that stuff that Paul was talking to Timothy, he's talking about there's an idea of those that are spiritual among them, those that are leading them spiritually, need to be the ones leading. And so hopefully that's the staff. Hopefully that's the deacons. Hopefully that's the ones in the church. Now, again, governed by the congregation. There are votes. We do all that kind of stuff. But the idea is to be led by a pastor. And so when I'm talking to pastors, I say, okay, you want to do that? Matter of fact, do we have a volunteer that wants to come up and help pull this bridge? That's usually the response I get. Is you think you can do it? Because I want you to experience the feel of what it takes. Because you're going to try to move the brick. You just want to drag it and bring it to you, okay? You got it? You got it? How does that feel? Hold on. Let me try to do this a little bit more. Maybe I'll do it this way. That might help. That's okay. Try it now. Okay. How does that feel? How are you feeling right now? A little nervous. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let me show you. So if you can, and again, I'm getting it right at you, right? So you keep pushing. Look, see, it starts coming. You got to put a little bit of an angle on it. But that tension is often what leaders feel, because you're trying to do it. Now go ahead and try it again. Now pull it up a little bit rather than just straight, and go. So you see it moving. Now once it starts moving, it moves, right? It's easy to move after that, but you have to keep that tension in place. Thank you, sir. Good job. Wonderful. Because I'm waiting for this thing to break. I've used it now about 2 years, so that's the problem. But there is a sense, and I tell this about leaders, that it does happen that some guys come in and say, okay, y'all, we're going to make all these changes. Here, let's do it. And they yank too hard. And it does. It can break. And I've seen pastors do it. I've seen an entire staff fired because they drew the line and said, we're going to do it our way, or we're not going to do it at all. And they all got together and voted out the whole staff. And then they hired a new pastor. And he did it different. He did it slowly. He came in. He used to go to that church. They knew him. They loved him. He put his arm around folks. 5 years later, they were doing the very things they fired the previous pastor for. But he did it in a loving and caring way and moved them slowly. But that idea is you keep the tension. So if you do it too fast, you break it. What a lot of pastors do is they feel the tension and they say, no, I'm not going to do it. The result of that is the brick doesn't move. It keeps declining. You keep having all the issues you've had. So the idea of leadership, and the problem is, Roger can probably speak to this. He's got more years at it than I do. That as you're doing this, you're very much aware that you're the one causing the tension, okay? That's one of those hard parts about being a leader. I used to do, as a youth pastor, I would have a youth council. And the youth council was actually formed with parents, had a third of parents, had a third of them were youth workers, and a third of them were actual youth. And one of the young men, who, by the way, is a pastor today, believe it or not, he came to our first youth council strategy, planning, calendar meeting, and there were probably 20 of us, 25 in this group, so it was a pretty large group. But we all sat down, we all planned, and but you have this group maybe wanting to do this, another one wanting to do something else, and you're having to adjust and all that, and then and he would, I remember him saying, "This is hard." Like, I thought we were just going to throw some dates, let's plan some fun things to put on a calendar, but you had to balance, because I had them doing spiritual things, social things, and service items. So they had to balance what they did. They couldn't just do, hey, let's all go to Disney World. They had to balance those things. So as he was doing that, it was really tough. And he said, then he went out and they shared some of the ideas and things they were doing with the people that he represented, I guess, his group. And they got on to him. Because, well, why didn't you do that? Or why couldn't we do this? And so he came to me one day and just said, leadership is hard. And he's 15, 16 at the time or something. And I'm like, yeah, thank you. That's exactly, hope you understand that. Now, the beauty of it is now he's a pastor of a church and experiencing the same thing. So I'm glad he got to experience this now, early on as a 16-year-old. But when you're pulling that and you're making those changes, you're actually causing the tension. And so sometimes you can feel that the tendency is, especially if people don't like you, I've had that where people talking about me, they don't know, David, he shouldn't be doing that. And so everything in me wants to say, okay, well, I don't, I'm going to release the tension. But as leaders, we are all called to keep going, to keep focused, because we know why we're doing it. Again, God's told us to move. We have to move in this direction. So as we keep going and keep going, again, it gets a little easier. And you see how quickly that release, you want the tension to be there because it takes the tension for this brick to move. So you're managing. One leader that I read his book, and he said, leadership is all about managing the disappointment of others. That's what it is. Because not everybody's going to get what they want. So you're managing how disappointed they're going to be in you. And that's a tough thing to have to do. But we all kind of understand that. If you've ever been a leader in any kind of way, you feel that. Now there's another idea. So that is, I would say, this is organizational. This is when a team is trying to lead and they feel that tension, and what's going to come up in your meeting as you're leading, you're going to say, hey, we need to back. Why don't we table this and not do this? And there are times when I would say, yeah, maybe we're moving too fast. So, but you don't release the tension. You don't give up. You can back off and just slowly apply that tension in order to move the brick. So you got that? You got that? This is the other one. So I need 2 other volunteers to come up here. Oh, fun. 2 ladies. I don't think I've ever had 2 ladies do this. So, okay, you get to stand there, and you get to stand here. Okay, this is a rubber band, by the way. And here's what I want y'all to do. I want you to pull on it. I want you to pull on it. Keep pulling. All right, and this kind of represents not the organizational tension, but between 2 people. Let's say they had an argument. Okay, so you feel this tension. Yes. Not that if you already had an argument, you might want to let go of it. But okay, good. That's good. All right, good. I'm safe then. Okay, but keep pulling. I want you to pull harder. Go ahead and pull harder. Keep. Now, how does that feel?
It's too tight.
No. It's going to slip. No. Okay. Well, this is what I want. Okay, I want you to walk forward. What I say is individually, this is what you want to relieve the tension. So if you approach her and say, hey, let's talk about this, the tension is actually released, right? And so there's that you keep the tension in place. Here, between 2 people or between groups of people, you want to be able to say, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's talk. So you want to do that. Now, those of you that are quick have already heard me say, because y'all remember, y'all know you wrote down every word I said, that Jesus didn't attend every fight that he was invited to, remember? So there is an avoidance thing, and you'll see that up there. There's an approach, but there is an avoid. And by avoid, I'm not saying you don't deal with it. I'm saying there are times when we need to be able to say, okay, is this worth the fight? That maybe we just give in and say, okay, it's fine. We'll do it your way. But there are times when that is appropriate. But there's a time when you approach each other to release the tension, to have the discussion. Thank you, ladies. Y'all did a great job. Give an applause. Right there. The idea that, an instance that where this happened to me, was that I mentioned the lady that I had to go to her house and all that. All that had to do with the church kitchen, of course. You don't mess with the church kitchen, okay? So here I am as the administrator, and there's a lady, and she's been our church kitchen person, and she's got a heart for ministry, and she's a wonderful person. And she had a quadruple bypass. And so there was all this discussion of, well, she didn't have anybody. After I'd been saying, get somebody behind you she had an idea, but she hadn't followed through with it. And so I, in her absence, went to her idea, to the lady and I asked her to do it. Well, this other lady, who thought she ought to have been the one to do it, was the one that was mad at me for doing that. And now the interesting thing is, this lady, I love her to death, again, great lady, but she would confuse the 3-car funeral. You know, she overthought everything. We had test cases of her being in charge when certain things were going on, and she would just go crazy. She would just, oh no, we don't have enough food, and there was plenty of food, but so I knew she couldn't handle it. For her personality, everybody who worked with her knew, don't let Kathy do that, please. just don't. And so there's no question that she wasn't the one to do it. So in my going and talking to her, that's what I did. I approached her. I came. I knew she was mad. She'd already told she didn't tell me, of course. She told everybody else. She was leaving the church, and so I'm sitting down with her, and I took somebody with me, one of the staff members with me, and I did. I said, I'm sorry. I apologize that I didn't explain this to you earlier. So I was sorry, and I took my let's say. She was 95% to blame, and I was only 5% to blame, but I didn't tell her that. I just apologized for my part of what I had done wrong. And immediately you saw that kind of tension between us went away. And I was able to talk to her, and I was able to share with her, and I said, now, I'm going to go ahead with my original decision. And I can explain to you all the reasons, if you want me to, of why I've done that. And she said, no. You don't have to do that. I understand. And I said, we would love to have you with us. Now, I didn't say, I'll give in if you'll do this, and we won't leave the church. We'll let you do that. Now, she kind of sat out for a little while, but probably 3 weeks later, here she is back in the kitchen, volunteering, being that person. We called on her for lots of other things to help. She was a great second chair person, and we loved her, and she knew that. And again, like I said, at the end, I didn't just, I think, help the kitchen move forward, but I also helped repair that relationship and maintain that relationship. But because she's my friend, and even to this day, I went back and preached in December back at Schindler, and while I'm there, she's up there giving me a hug and thanking me and all that. So as we're leading, we can't forget the personal side of things either. There are people that will just grab that and just say, okay, well, we're thinking of the organization, but it does involve, we are the church. It does involve people. And as we're doing that, it does make a difference. The last little thing I want to talk to, I think I'm going to be okay, is known versus unknown. There's these dynamics that we have to do. The trust and the tension. I didn't mention the trust part of this because what happens when you have the tension on here, the church has to trust that the leaders are doing this. So that's where the movement comes from. When they finally say, okay, you're not going to get 100%, but you're going to get most of the people to say, we get what you're saying and we're going to go. then we'll move. So does that make sense? So you have the trust and the tension dynamic, and that one you have the approach and the avoid dynamic. This one's the known and the unknown. So go on to the next thing. So this is not the one I sent, the corrected version I sent today, but that's fine. It's the same thing. Mine was just prettier. If you've ever heard of the Johari window, it's something we learned in college. I was a psych major, so we had to learn all this stuff. It was written by or created by two guys. One guy's name was Joseph and Harrison. Those are their first names. So that's where Joe and Harry came from. See, you think it's this nice, wonderful meaning word, but it's just two guys' names crammed together. And actually we make it sound super, British. So it's Johari is what we call it. So the Johari window, but it really measures two things: the known, what I know about myself as a leader, and what I don't know about myself, what's not known about me. And then on the other side is what the other people know about me, what other people know, and then what other people don't know about me. And so you have this kind of four quadrants that come out of that. So you've got the known to self, what I know about myself, and what the public knows, what everybody else out there knows. They call that open area. It's called the arena. That's what Johari called it. It's often called the public self. That means you know me. I'm a short, fat guy. Y'all see that. I know that. So, we don't have to talk about it. I know it. So as we're talking about those things, that's the open area of our life. Then that's healthy because we're known and you're known. Or you know me. The other one is the things that's not known by me, but known by others. So that's those blind spots that we have in life. That's the turnip greens that I got stuck right here in my teeth. And I'm smiling and talking, and you see that, and you're thinking, oh, I feel bad about this guy. I need it. And there are some people who lovingly can do that. Hey, David, got a little, better check that, Or all that. Some people are very good at reflecting, holding up the mirror to your blind spot. And we know, when we trust people, when we love each other, people can do that for us. When we don't, when we're not real comfortable, then we y'all just let me smile here with my turnip greens, and I'm just smiling, and y'all are just thought everybody, So what happens when I get out there, go to the bathroom, look in the mirror and go, all those people have been laughing at me. That's what they were laughing at. They were, and so those can be dangerous, those blind spots in my life. But there are people, the way they talk. I know a lady that just, her voice grates on my nerves. It's just the way, y'all meet people like that. And so you want to say to her, could you change the way you talk? Because she's just not aware of it, but there is this idea of something that people know and they're looking at, but that person themselves is not aware of. The other side is known to me, or not, but not known by anybody else. That's the hidden part of our life. That is the mask we put on. When there's stuff going on in my life, and I'm not going to share that with anybody. And maybe it's a secret sin. Maybe it's just stuff that I don't trust you, so I'm not going to let you know that my family's going through this difficult time, right? So what a healthy church should be about, it really is opening up those areas. It should be a place where I can trust you and I can say, let me tell you what's going on in my heart, in my life. Another person, maybe I'm blind on, they can come to me and they can say, let me share something with you, brother. It might be better if you tried this. Have you ever tried a budget? Then you're not having to come here and ask the church for money all the time. And we've had to do that with loving people at our church because we loved them and we cared for them, but we weren't just going to hand out money to them. So we had to put our arm around them and say, let's give you more help. Let's give you some areas where we can budget, help you budget. Because this one is actually kind of the area of the subconscious. It's not known to me, but it's not known to anybody else. Those are those deep motivations in my life. My relationship with my father and how that affects me now. That you don't know that. I may not even be aware of that. How does all this stuff affect me? Because when that happens, somebody says something. This happened to me. One lady, I learned my lesson. I was a minister of missions, and I'm talking to this lady. She had been on this trip down to Mexico to see our missionaries, and she had a concern. Now, I already knew about the concern, Our two missionaries that were down there in Mexico, they were dating as teenagers. They grew up in the church. They had their kids. They moved down there to be missionaries. But if you're ever around them, she yells at him and he yells at her. They had that kind of relationship. They're very open about the struggles that they go through. And it's frustrating, and we've talked to them about it before. But this lady had gone down there, and she came back, and she was very concerned. And so she's telling us, we might lose them if we don't get some help, or they might have this relationship issue. And so we had talked about it. I'm in a meeting. I've got to get over to the church, and this is prior to a Sunday night, and I'm having this quick meeting. But I wanted to get through about 4 different things. And so she kept talking about it, and I did the dumb thing. I know this. I kind of said, okay, all right, I got it. That offended her, Zenobia, that I waved her off by doing it. And we went ahead, we finished the meeting. She quietly sat there, seething. And it wasn't until later that, bless her heart, I'm so happy she did this. She came to me and sat down and said, that offended me. And I said, I am so sorry. That here's the pressure I was under. I was doing. I get that now. I'm sorry. There was something in her. Now, she was a cop. She was looked down upon as a lady cop. She had to fight for everything she could. She didn't want to be dismissed, right? That was not in her personality, in her family. I learned a lot about her later to realize that for me, this was just, hey, let's move on. To her, I was dismissing her as a person. That had a lot more to do with her and then her internal feelings than it did with my hand waving. But I had to understand that. And we repaired that relationship. Again, I had to repair a lot of relationships in my life. I guess maybe I'm sharing too much. But it's that kind of thing to be able to say, okay, I don't know why I'm reacting this way. I've seen that in business meetings where people, they get up and they're mad and they're angry, and you're thinking, what's that got to do with anything that we're doing? But it's because of loss of control, or we don't trust, and there's these deeper issues there. So here's what we love to see. In healthy churches, this takes place. As leaders, you're aware of this. So as you're doing this, you're actually pushing back that middle line going up and down. You're pushing that this way. So in your mind's eye, I know this might be hard. I've got some other ones where actually I can show you. But if you're pushing that this way, then the blind spot's decreasing, right? The area of unknown is decreasing. And matter of fact, if I'm being open to others and I'm sharing with them, I trust them, so I'm sharing more about myself. If that's pushing down and keeps pushing down, then this unknown part is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. All those other areas, the blind spots and all that, are all getting smaller. They're all decreased. And we're living more of our life open, and we can share with other people because we trust them and they trust us. That's what a church ought to be, right? That's what all those one another's are about. As we share with one another, we struggle. Then when we come to times when we don't agree, okay, when leaders have to make the tension, we've got a good relationship in place to be able to say, tell me what's going on. And then, I get that feeling. I talked to you about the man that was the teacher that had authority issues, that was talking about me. I was able to still try to love that guy and concerned about it because I realized he had bigger issues than just just lying about me and misrepresenting the words that I said. It's for him there was something deeper. So in essence, what we do as a leader as we come to this dynamic in church is we're constantly leading people, we're discipling them. We want them to do this because of Jesus in their life, and there comes more trusting of each other, and I'm trusting you more, and you're coming. It's just a more healthy relationship in that church. And those churches that do that tackle those obstacles. Because I can't tell you, when we get over to plans and strategies, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to give you any plans and strategies because you're the ones that have to come up with those. So the idea, though, is you try to teach people how to face those obstacles when they come. I do a lot of marriage counseling, and I tell them that in those settings that you're going to you're going to have a lot of, well, in this case, it's probably premarital counseling. I'll talk about it more. And that is, you're going to have obstacles. It's going to be like jumping hurdles. Right. And I use that analogy of jumping hurdles. And some people have a lot of issues. They're not compatible, they would say. But I say, what I'm teaching you in counseling is, I'm not teaching you I'm not going to address, I'm not going to tell you he's right, she's wrong. I'm going to teach you how to jump hurdles. It's the communication, talking about the issue, that's the bigger issue. So as you're jumping hurdles, and you're jumping hurdles together holding hands, which makes it even harder, I can't tell you how many hurdles are going to be, especially in premarital counseling. So as you're trying to figure that out, you have to learn to jump and to trust that person as you're jumping those hurdles. So the issue is, you can only have one hurdle and fall over that one, and you're out. You're out of the race. So it's not the number of hurdles, it's how do you address those? And that's what I talk to churches about. Obstacles that you may face as you implement new strategies, you have to learn how to lovingly address those things. When to keep the tension in place, when to approach that person, when to avoid that just say, okay, we're not gonna have that conversation because that's not a big enough issue. That one pastor he used to say, trains don't stop for barking dogs. That's what he would say. And so, which is true, and I get that, but there are some times when you're talking about another person, you probably need to stop and deal with that. And so it's having that wisdom that comes from God to be able to do that. You see that in this idea of how Joshua was prepared to lead the people into some very difficult situations. And we'll talk about that again later. But they had to trust him. And he had to know that he was hearing from God. And that's the most important thing. Questions, comments, snide remarks? Roger, anything to add before we go? Let me pray for y'all. Lord, we thank you that even these issues that we face as leaders, as teachers, as committee people, as we work together with each other, Lord, that you are so concerned even about that. It's not just about the end result. It's about the journey and our journey together. And those things that you talk about of who we are, of peace and patience and gentleness and self-control and all those things are all internal things that we need to have. We need to apply as leaders. We need to be courageous enough to follow you and to do the things that you call us to do, but be courageous enough to address issues and lovingly lead as you call us to do that. Lord, I thank you for this time together. We thank you for the food and the fact that we can have a little break and enjoy that fellowship. May even our discussions now continue, and as we understand what you want us to do as courageous leaders. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
David, give us the list again. A move of God.
Move of God. Somebody help.
Something about humility, but I don't know what it is.
A humble people.
A humble people.
What did we just study?
Courageous leaders.
There we say, very good. The long one's the long one. A commitment to do whatever it takes. And the fifth one? Plans and strategies.